think this is working? Question mark. Welcome to Daily Metal. Today I'm going to break down my Pig Destroyer tier list and talk a little bit about one of the greatest grindcore bands of all time. I'm very excited to see them this September at Beer and Metal Fest in Philly. If you'll be there, let me know. Fests are always great for meeting other metalheads from lots of different cities. And if people like this video, I might also do tier list for the other two headliners of the festival. The equally awesome bands Converge and Napalm Death, who both have big discographies, which are a lot of fun to go through. So without further ado, I'm going to do this chronologically and cover EPs and splits, as well as the 6 full-length releases from Virginia grindcore legends Pig Destroyer. So we start with the band's demo. Cassette tape, released on cassette tape, that's how old it is, which immediately showcased the talent of the band, though it is definitely the most straightforwardly grindcore release that Pig Destroyer ever put out. A lot of the thrash and doom influences that make the band's sound so recognizable and interesting wouldn't come until later. It's a demo, so unsurprisingly, the recording quality sucks. Particularly, the vocals are just complete mud. And the vocals are as important to me as the guitar and the drums for the Pig Destroyer sound. J.R. Hayes, Pig Destroyer's vocalist, has a very unique sounding growl that we'll talk about more in the later albums. So we're going to put this one on D tier. Next, we have the Orchid and Pig Destroyer split, which also came out in 1997. That's this one. Pig Destroyer, of course, was in its first year putting out music, as was Orchid, but Orchid was a bit closer to sounding like themselves at their peak, and to be honest, their side of the split is clearly the better of the two, despite the fact that Pig Destroyer, I think, ultimately becomes a greater band than them over time. However, the mixing is majorly improved in this record compared to the demo, and while still not at a great level, it is far more listenable than the demo, so I'm going to put it on C tier. Which brings us to the full length by Pig Destroyer, Explosions in Ward 6, which, God, I really can't describe how much I dislike this album cover. It might be one of my least favorite album covers of all time. It always hurts more when you actually like the band. Moving past that, we see the band making another step forward to better mixing, with JR vocals even more clear on this one, and the guitar tone coming through more to hear some thrashy riffs, like on the track Yellow Line Transfer. However, I love album covers, so I'm going to have to majorly penalize the band for that, and also put this one on C tier. Next is the split between Pig Destroyer and Knob, which came out in 1999. Where is it? Here it is. But for some reason, the songs from this are not on the band's compilation that would come out soon thereafter, 38 Counts of Battery, which is a shame because it is probably the best, in my opinion, of these early Pig Destroyer releases. It does wind up on the second compilation the band puts out, Painter of Dead Girls, which is also the name of one of the tracks. On the split, the sound quality is still majorly lacking, though you do finally get some good reverb on JR's vocals, so overall I'd put this one on B tier. I have the picture disc on here too, because I'm an idiot, and forgot there were the same tracks as on the Pig Destroyer and Knob Split, so we throw that one on B tier as well. Then you get the split with ISIS. God, this is such a good release. It's entirely covers, with ISIS covering The Great Street Cleaner by Godflesh, seminal industrial pioneers, and Pig Destroyer covering the Carcass classics, Exhumed to Consume, and Genital Grinder / Regurgitation of Giblets. You can find these tracks on the 38 Counts compilation. They're well worth a listen. With Pig Destroyer using the bass tracks to really play around with their sound in a way that would be realized even more in the following releases, this one goes on A tier. And now we get to our first of the 3 peaks in the band's career. See if you can guess what the others are before I get to them. The legendary Prowler in the Yard, which turned 20 recently. Not just one of the best grindcore albums of all time, but possibly my favorite horror-themed album of all time, with one of my favorite album intros of all time, the infamous Jennifer. While Prowler is still thoroughly in Pig Destroyer's more straightforward grindcore phase, this is also the album where the band really starts to incorporate other influences, from the thrash riffs on Naked Trees to the epic songs Starbelly and Piss Angel. Starbelly is the sound that the band would adopt as its go-to for the rest of their career, that mix of doom, grindcore, and thrash into a nasty metal stew. And Piss Angel features all sorts of glitchy weirdness, using both samples and guitar harmonics, and of course the outro returning to our ill-fated Jennifer. And I can't leave out the album cover. There's just something about someone maiming themselves with a bone saw and a wicked smile on their face that's somehow even more disturbing than the usual go-to imagery in grindcore of an evil person or monster maiming an innocent person. This one goes on S tier, obviously. Next is the split with Benum, California grindcore band, very much in the same vein as Pig Destroyer, and we're talking Pig Destroyer in their post-Prowler in the Yard phase. So the album winds up being a bit unbalanced, especially because Benum comes first. I'm not trying to be mean to those guys here, but it's like drinking Diet Coke and then drinking regular Coke afterwards. It is really short, 7 minutes long. I'm a sucker for super short grindcore splits, and that does lessen the impact of the differences in quality between the two bands. So overall, I'll put this one on B tier. Then we get to the next full-length release, Terrifier. A fan favorite, I assume at least in part because of the titties on the album cover. I have never had to deal with so many horny guys as when I went to see Pig Destroyer at St. Vitus, so I'm convinced that at least part of their fan base is led by their dicks as much as their ears. But of course this album is so much more than horny. You got a lot of Pig Destroyer's most well-known tracks on here, like Thumbsucker, Towering Flesh, and of course the title track, Terrifier. This is definitely the album where the full ferocity and insanity of Scott Hole's guitar begins to be captured, with Towering Flesh being a great example, but I'm not a huge fan of how they did the vocals on this album. It's of course far better than, all of these early releases. But I think they just hadn't worked out how to balance them with the new sound they were giving to the guitar. So that stops it for me from being an S tier album, which I know is going to be controversial, but this one goes on A tier for me. After Terrifier, you have the three-way split between Pig Destroyer, Cold Worker, and Antigama. And who wouldn't want a three-way with the boys from Pig Destroyer? I love this one too because after putting out the very polished Terrifier, Pig Destroyer decided to go raw again and do covers of an Integrity song and an Unsane song, both really awesome bands, and Pig Destroyer honors them with some ferocious covers, especially the Unsane song Understand is one of the rawest things that Pig Destroyer has ever put out. And unlike the Benum split, the contributions by Cold Worker and Antigama keep pace and match the levels of intensity from Pig Destroyer. It sounds like a 90s grindcore split in the best kind of way. You buy it for Pig Destroyer and learn about two other awesome grindcore bands from Sweden and Poland respectively. This one goes on A tier for me. Then comes my favorite Pig Destroyer album of all time, Phantom Limb. The beautiful album cover was designed by the great John Baisley of Baroness fame, and JR called it the most deranged metal songs we could come up with. Phantom Limb is the band growing up, realizing that making horrific and disturbing lyrics can be accomplished even better with well thought out lyrics versus just saying the most obscene or violent thing imaginable. Nothing exemplifies this more than the song Girl in the Slayer Jacket, one of my favorite songs about suicide ever. Incredibly disturbing and all too real. The playing on this album is so fucking tight, especially on my favorite Pig Destroyer song of all time, Thought Crime Spree, with ridiculously fast thrash riffing, inhumanely cacophonous drumming, and possibly the greatest example in metal of screaming sounding even heavier when all the other instruments behind it suddenly disappear. S tier, baby. Fucking S tier. How could Pig Destroyer top that? In a very shrewd move, they didn't try to, and instead went in a whole other direction with the Natasha EP. Just shy of 38 minutes, it's a single song of beautiful sludge metal. The very simple and straightforward album cover is iconic, and this is the release where noise wizard Blake Harrison really comes into his own. Blake joined the band in 2006. His presence is certainly felt on Phantom Limb. The album title even evokes the kind of uncomfortable and disturbing feeling you get from the noise he layers to the tracks. But with Natasha, Blake takes center stage and shows both, number one, you absolutely can be a noise musician, and number two, you can be a noise musician in a band and not just be ornamentation or something to play in between songs. Few people have used noise this well. Unsane is one of them, so no surprise that Pig Destroyer covered them in that split. This one also is S tier for me. So Natasha drops when I'm just starting college. I'm so stoked to see what the band does next, and nothing. Until right before I graduate in spring of 2012, I was a music director for my college radio station, WCWM, at the College of William and Mary. And I get a hint of what is to come when Bob at Relapse Records, shout out to Bob, great guy, sends me the song Sis from yet to be released Book Burner. This song was good enough to pull me out of the grindcore karaoke K-hole I had enveloped myself in at the time. If you're not familiar, just look up grindcore karaoke. It's a great side project by J.R. Hayes. It might have been by Scott Hole. I sometimes confuse which person does which project. Sorry about that, guys. Anyways, I remember my friend Josh was just as stoked as me for the album after listening to this track. It was so exciting because it showed a synthesis of Prowler in the Yard era Pig Destroyer and Phantom Limb era Pig Destroyer. It was technically impressive and raw at the same time. And while it is a really good album, it didn't wind up being consistent enough for me to fulfill this promise entirely. Still, with tracks like Sis and The Diplomat that are some of the best that Pig Destroyer has ever done, this one solidly lands on A tier. Next, we get Mass and Volume. I really wanted to like Mass and Volume, particularly because it was released as a fundraiser for a friend. But the decision to cut these tracks from Phantom Limb, these were all essentially tracks that didn't wind up on the album, was the right decision. That album is so great because of how tight and focused it is, and the two songs on Mass and Volume are anything but. Unlike his sorcery on Natasha, Blake's noise on these tracks sounds aimless and random. This one definitely goes on C tier for me. Alright, we are in the home stretch, just two left. Next is Head Cage, which was the band's first full length in 6 years following Book Burner. It is a well done album when you've been around as long as Pig Destroyer has, and you don't get too crazy with going in new directions. You pretty much stop putting out bad releases. Unfortunately, you can still put out mediocre releases. I barely remember what this album sounded like before doing this, and listening to it again reminded me why. Again, nothing sinful here, nothing, super egregious to complain about, just not much praiseworthy either. I'd put it on B tier. But we do end on a good note. The Octagonal Stairway EP is my favorite thing Pig Destroyer has done since Natasha came out. It was invigorating to see, following Head Cage, that the band was not petering out. They still have some good songs left in them, and hopefully, if it's anything like this EP, we might get a S tier or A tier full length album in our future. Octagonal Stairway goes up on A tier for me. So that's my tier list. I know some of these are controversial, especially putting Terrifier below Phantom Limb. So let me know what you think in the comments, if you disagree with me, if you think I'm full of shit, whatever you want to say. And please subscribe to find out what the metal album of the day is, why it sounds so brutal, and where it fits in the history of the genre.